my last minute guest is Michal Matloň, the place and architecture psychologist, and he helps to create cities and places based on scientific knowledge, so people can be happy in them, and maybe he will answer your questions. So.
Hi, my name is Michal Matloň, and I work with psychology of architecture, and that means using knowledge about the human mind to help create places and spaces that improve people's well-being. I also work at the Living Core in Vienna, which is an innovation consultancy focused on supporting radical and meaningful innovations through transforming organizations, culture, strategy, people, and spaces. And we also work with architects, real estate developers, and municipalities on understanding the people and places they are going to serve, and then creative and innovative plans and developments that serve those people. And I also run the Venetian Letter, which is a newsletter focused on human-oriented and evidence-based architecture, which we founded together with doctor and neuroscientist Natalia Olszewska. And today I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into biophilia. So the question is, what is biophilia? It's a scientific theory that was popularized somewhere around the 70s. And one of the earliest kind of popular studies is Rogers Ulbricht study, where the team looked at a hospital in Pennsylvania and took patients' data from two groups of patients. Both groups were recovering from gallbladder surgery during, I think, 8 years or so in the hospital. But one group was recovering in a room with a view of a nearby park. And the other group was recovering in a room with a window view of another wall of the hospital facade. And when they took all these patients' data, they took patients that matched together, and so that all the other variables would be accounted for. And what they found is that actually the patients that recovered with a room with a view of nature recovered about a day faster than the others with the view of the wall. And they also took significantly less pain medication. So this was a study that kind of started the whole thing and popularized it. But since then, already quite a lot of research was done in this area, especially with the new methods that we can do now in terms of neuroscience and digital measurement. And the research so far shows that nature can basically help us with three things. And this is mental and physical health. So for example, it can decrease our levels of stress. It can also increase our mental performance, such as memory or attention, and improve our creativity. And it can also improve our mood and help us elicit feelings of beauty when we use nature and natural principles in our designs. For example, this is a screenshot from a very interesting report that I think we can then link under the video. And the report analyzed 83 studies about the positive effects of nature and natural principles, biophilic principles, implemented into the design. And they created a very nice, simple, and practical overview of how we can use these principles in design. And they came up with about 14 different ways, 14 patterns of biophilic design, that's the name of the report, of how we can use nature to benefit people in design. And the next question is probably, so why do we benefit from nature? And for that, we can look into our history, into our evolution. So the human species developed over hundreds of thousands, even millions of years in certain environments. And during our evolution, what evolution does is that basically the organism that develops in it it gets kind of built around the environment in which the organism develops. So we have been built around nature. Our brains, our bodies are tailor-made for nature. And this is why basically, although our brains and our bodies have stayed the same for the last 200,000 years, but our lifestyle has changed dramatically. We have moved from nature to cities, to vastly different environments, and we spend about 90% of our times inside. And this is where the trouble comes. So this is also why it's important to look at nature and derive the principles that we can use in design to kind of get back in touch with it. For example, when you look at this picture of an African jungle, you can see that nature has many different qualities that our brains and our bodies react to when we are there. And it's not just plants, it's not just trees that you can see there, but it's also many other things, such as the water, which you can not just see, but you can also hear it, you can smell it, you can touch it. You can see different kinds of light. You can be in a shadow, in a direct sunlight. You can see sunlight that goes through the canopies of the trees. You can also hear many other sounds like birds chirping. And you can also feel different changes in temperature of the environment that is there. So it's really like a multi-sensory experience. And this is a picture of an African savanna where we moved when we were already kind of shaping up as human beings. And here, apart from all the other qualities that we saw in the previous picture, you can also see some other qualities, some different types of spaces which we can find in this picture. For example, you can see a hill on which you can climb and you can observe what is happening around you, where are predators, where is water or other resources. You can also use the trees or bushes for protection and privacy. This is also called prospect and refuge theory. And so we can really learn a lot from nature for design, and it kind of all fits nicely with the evidence from research that we have, such as these 83 studies that are mentioned in the report. And so what is the goal of biophilia is basically taking ourselves, taking our brains and building cities in a way that those brains will not feel like in a city, in an environment which maybe it's a bit difficult for understand for them and stressful, but building these cities in a way that they will feel like in their natural environment, although they will still be in a city. And so next question is, of course, how to do this. So due to time limitations, I just picked a few principles that I will illustrate, but as I mentioned, there are about 14 different ways of implementing biophilic design in whatever we do. And this is also an important thing to keep in mind, that these principles do not just apply to landscape design or to building, parks and these kind of natural spaces. These principles can be applied everywhere in design. So whether designing a building's facade, whether picking furniture for interiors, or types of lights for interior or exterior spaces, as we will see. So the first and the most obvious principle is just bringing nature to spaces and places. And this is kind of self-explanatory. There's a lot of research that shows that this really has beneficial effects. Spending time in nature can really improve our creativity. It can calm us down. It can even refresh our attention, because in nature, in natural spaces, we use a different kind of attention that actually restores our attentive capacities. Then when we go kind of a level further, we can see that another principle is using natural materials. And this is a principle that you can use in any decision that you do during design. For example, there are studies which show that our interaction with wood, especially when it's the wood in this natural form, so we can see all those kind of shapes and curves, and we can also feel it and touch it, can calm us down. It can decrease our heart rate, it can decrease our stress levels. And you can use many different materials such as wood, stone, cork, different types of grasses, and so on. Another principle would be using natural patterns and textures. So when you look at nature and when you remember the pictures that we looked at before, you can see that nature visually is a very complex experience. It's a visually complex environment. However, it's not complex chaotically because usually the patterns that we find in nature, the geometry, is organized according to certain principles because of how things grow, how things develop. You have probably heard about fractals. You have probably heard about the golden ratio. So these are all the principles around which the natural geometry is organized. And there's also a term for that in biophilic design, and it's called organized complexity. And we need to get much more of this kind of geometry into our designs, into our buildings. So what we did for the last 100 years is that a lot of the modernist architecture that we had basically got rid of all of this. They got rid of all the details of all the ornamentation and all the kind of natural geometry that was there. And now we see from research that this is something that would be really beneficial to people, and that it actually also influences how much people like the spaces. So people usually find spaces beautiful when they provide them with this organized complexity in their geometry. But this is not just something that we can get inspired by in 2 dimensions, such as when picking a wallpaper for a wall or a material for a curtain, but we can also think in 3D. So the same principles apply when we are designing things such as staircase railings, or when we are picking the shape of our chairs or tables that we are selecting for our interiors. Another element is water. So water is one of the most basic things that we need for survival, and it seems that our brains react quite positively to it. At least when it's not a wave, a tsunami wave going our way. But again, as I mentioned before, water is something that we can see, that we can touch, that we can feel, that can help us with regulating temperature in the given place. So this is something that we should strive to implement into our designs as often as possible. Another dimension would be light. And here I have 2 examples. So on the left side is a picture of a light coming through tree canopies, which is light that we usually encounter when we wander through nature, like through a forest. But at the same time, it's a type of light that we encounter quite rarely especially in interiors such as offices. And so we should take a look at how light behaves in nature and then try to simulate it also in the spaces that we create. And on the right side is another example of how we can use these biophilic principles to design our city streets better in terms of light. And this is because in the recent years, especially for technical reasons, we have started using LED lights, which often have quite cold light, a lot of blue spectrum in it. And research shows, and you've probably read about this in terms of, you shouldn't look into a mobile phone before you go to sleep, or you shouldn't watch TV because then the blue light disrupts our circadian rhythms. It makes our sleep worse. And so this is something that we should really think about our streets, where the street lights accompany us during the evening. Sometimes even, they shine inside. And so we should really strive to use street lights which have warm light. So this kind of yellow orange light with a reduced blue frequencies. And here are just some examples of how all of these principles or multiple of these principles can come together. So this is an office from my previous job at HV Revis, and this is an office in London where you can see many of these principles being implemented from plants, natural materials, natural colors and patterns and shapes. And also different types of spaces, depending on how much you want to focus on or be covered around yourself, or maybe observe more openly what is happening around you. This is a office in Japan where you can again see that it's not just the plants that they brought there, but where they really thought about the natural geometry, like on the wallpaper, on the wall behind, and also the different types of light. Another space here shows also an example of this kind of prospect and refuge theory, where you have certain types of spaces where you can hide and have more privacy, but also observe what is happening around you. And regarding these kind of natural wallpapers here, what is quite interesting is that research shows that even simulated nature can have these positive effects. So we don't have to experience live nature, but it can also be pictures or videos of nature that can elicit this positive response in our brain. And then when we take it a level further, so from the interiors to the exteriors and to our streets, we can see that there's still a lot of improvement in how we can start designing places which are really good for people and brain friendly. This is just an example. On the top picture, you can see a train station in a German city, which was destroyed in the war. And afterwards, it was replaced by a more functional or functionalist station. And you can see that the difference is quite huge in terms of design. And this is a pattern that was repeated mainly in the 20th century through all our cities, where we have started, or where we have actually stopped implementing these biophilic principles. And although, before the 20th century, the builders and the architects rather did it, intuitively, now we already have the research which tells us that these things are important. Things such as ornamentation or small, tiny detail. Things such as, symmetry and all this kind of natural geometry. So I'm by no means saying that we need to start building buildings which look exactly like the old ones, but we can find a lot of inspiration and use that together with the research that we have to design buildings which are much closer to how our brain understands space. And just as an illustration that this is not just a European or a Western European thing, but when you look at traditional architecture all around the world, you can find the same principles basically all over and over again. And this is also a hint which confirms what we know from research, that these shapes, patterns, and visual organization of space is somehow very close to how our brain operates. So what I would like to encourage you to is to build nature. And that doesn't just mean building parks and planting trees, which is very important still, but also, as we've seen in this presentation, to really understand these biophilic principles and how to apply them into every design decision that we make, whether it's a landscape, city, street, facade, interior, furniture design, anything. And I would also like to invite you to connect on LinkedIn, where I'm also sharing quite a lot of different and interesting articles, new research, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Now I'm really happy that I'm surrounded by lots of architects here in the office, because this is kind of thing I definitely play them, especially our interns. Quite nice material. So thank you very much, and I'm happy that you managed to be here with us.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. And yeah, I'll be definitely happy to then connect with all of you and, explore what we do.